An independent editorial defense analysis focused on Australia's strategic environment.
The acquisition of 72 F-35A Lightning II aircraft represents the most significant capital investment in the history of the Royal Australian Air Force. It symbolizes a definitive shift toward fifth-generation, network-centric warfare. Yet the strategic utility of this fleet is currently being tested, not by a peer adversary, and not by a complex electromagnetic environment, but by a domestic labor market dynamic that threatens to hollow out the force structure from within. The operational readiness of an Air Force is frequently calculated in terms of airframe availability, spare parts logistics, and weapons stockpiles. But these metrics act as lagging indicators if the human component of the system fails to match the hardware density. Recent developments in February 2026 indicate that the Australian Department of Defence is confronting a critical bottleneck in pilot retention, one severe enough to prompt non-market interventions, and this raises fundamental questions about the sustainability of the current all-volunteer force model in a high-technology economy. Reports emerging on February 4, 2026, suggest a profound systemic anxiety. These reports allege informal coordination between defense officials and major commercial carriers. The goal? To delay or throttle the recruitment of separating military pilots. If valid, such measures indicate that traditional retention levers, such as service obligations, retention bonuses, and appeals to patriotism, have reached a point of diminishing returns. From a systems engineering perspective, the pilot is the most expensive and time-intensive component of the weapon system to replace. While an F-35A can be manufactured and delivered within a predictable industrial timeline, generating a combat-ready pilot capable of exploiting the full sensor fusion capabilities of the platform requires a minimum of 3 to 5 years, and an investment exceeding 15 million Australian dollars. When a pilot exits the service for the commercial sector, the Air Force loses not only the sunk cost of training, it loses the tactical intuition and institutional memory that form the basis of operational capability. This personnel crisis directly impacts the concept of crew ratios. This is the mathematical foundation of combat readiness. A healthy fighter wing requires a ratio significantly higher than 1 pilot per aircraft, typically aiming for 1.5 to 2.0 to sustain high-tempo operations. Without this depth, the physical fleet size becomes misleading. A squadron with 12 jets but only 12 pilots cannot sustain 24-hour combat patrols without inducing rapid fatigue and compromising safety. If the Royal Australian Air Force is operating with a pilot deficit estimated between 20 and 30%, a significant portion of the F-35 fleet is effectively demoted to static storage. Regardless of its technical serviceability, this transforms the fleet from a strategic deterrent into a logistical burden, where maintenance costs continue to accrue on airframes that lack the operators necessary to generate combat effects. The driver of this attrition is a stark disparity. It sits between the rigid salary structures of public service and the escalating demand of the global aviation market. As commercial travel rebounds and expands, carriers such as Qantas and Virgin Australia offer compensation packages that dwarf military pay scales, often with significantly lower operational risk and greater lifestyle stability. The friction is not merely financial, it is structural. The military aviation career path involves frequent relocations, administrative burdens, and the physical toll of high-G maneuvering. When the civilian market offers a premium for the same core skill set without the associated service hardships, the military faces a structural disadvantage. One that asymmetric recruitment tactics or administrative barriers can only temporarily mitigate. Furthermore, the attempt to administratively restrict the movement of labor introduces a complex second-order effect on recruitment. The proposition of a military career is traditionally built on the acquisition of transferable skills. If the perception takes root that the Defense Force is actively impeding the post-service career mobility of its personnel, the initial recruitment pipeline may contract. Prospective officer cadets analyzing the long-term trajectory of their careers may view the service not as a stepping stone to professional aviation, but as a potential career trap. This creates a negative feedback loop. Retention measures designed to preserve current capability may inadvertently degrade future capability generation. This dilemma is exacerbated by the broader context of the AUKUS partnership. The pursuit of nuclear-powered submarines under Pillar 1 places an immense strain on the same limited pool of technically apt personnel that the Air Force draws from. The demographic reality of Australia limits the aggregate number of individuals physically and mentally qualified to operate complex systems. Consequently, the services are not only competing with the private sector, but are increasingly competing with one another for human capital. This internal competition suggests that the expansive force structure goals outlined in recent strategic reviews may be mathematically incompatible with the available demographic inputs. Technological solutions, such as the MQ-28 GHOSTPAT, offer a potential offset to this vulnerability, but they are not an immediate panacea. The concept of the loyal wingman is designed to amplify the combat mass of a single-manned aircraft. However, this doctrinal shift fundamentally relies on the presence of a manned flight leader. Automation and artificial intelligence can reduce the cognitive load, but they currently require a human in the loop for complex tactical decision-making. Therefore, a shortage of experienced pilots creates a bottleneck that restricts the deployment of unmanned systems as well. The reliance on gentlemen's agreements highlights a rigidity in the personnel system that has not kept pace with the fluidity of the modern labor market. In the private sector, a talent shortage typically triggers a wage-price spiral until equilibrium is reached. The public sector, constrained by rigid pay bands and political oversight, lacks this agility. The result is a persistent capability gap. The strategic weight of the F-35 lies in its sensor fusion and network connectivity, capabilities that require continuous, high-level training to master. A high turnover rate dilutes this proficiency, resulting in a force that may know how to fly the aircraft, but lacks the deep tactical expertise required to survive in a contested environment. Ultimately, the situation reveals a critical fragility in the Australian deterrence posture. The procurement of hardware has historically been the primary focus of defense policy. The assumption was that the personnel component would naturally follow. The current crisis demonstrates that human capital is a finite strategic resource, arguably more scarce and harder to generate than the platforms themselves. As the Royal Australian Air Force navigates this period of instability, the effectiveness of its air combat power will likely be determined not by the radar cross-section of its fighters, but by its ability to restructure the social contract with its aviators. The trade-off facing planners is acute. Either significantly restructure the compensation and career model to compete directly with the private sector, accepting a higher per capita personnel cost, or accept a permanent reduction in operational readiness. Where the size of the Air Force is dictated not by the number of aircraft purchased, but by the number of pilots the system can successfully hold captive.